work up, having built a new international structure, which we want to build into new internationalism with the merger of the ICFTU and the old IFTU to become the International Trade Union Confederation, or Unions International, then we want to make sure that we now stake our claim in terms of building that environment around decent work and the consciousness of those with rights that are associated with it, right through every nation. What I wanted to say today, of course, and you heard me at the press conference, is that this is really timely. We're going to see a devastating fallout for workers around the world from the global financial crisis. It's no comfort that we've been saying for a very long time now that there was, in fact, market failure after market failure after market failure, that we were worried about the dark side of private equity, that was simply speculative investment, stripping assets, loading companies up with debt, seeing job losses, and the vulnerability of all of that was then, simply, I suppose, escalated by the financial sector itself, who argued for deregulation over 2 decades, and in fact got to the point where they were simply leveraging debt upon leveraging debt upon leveraging debt to the point whereas we know the subprime crisis started because working Americans couldn't earn enough to pay their bills. The rights at work for people sit right in the middle of that, because if you look at what happened in the US, and there were commentators, not our friends, people like Larry Summers from the Financial Times and others, who stood alongside of the union movement in Davos as early as 4 and 5 years ago, saying that the profit versus wages share in the US was at a 30-year high, and it was really scary. It's like a set of alligator jaws. Australia, we're seeing the same things emerge. The only thing that actually shifts that and makes for more equity is a capacity to bargain. And when collective bargaining's fallen to 70% in the private sector in the US, and they had a minimum wage of $5.50 for a decade, then the rest is history. That couldn't happen here. It would have happened. You can see the trends emerging if we hadn't been able to shift a government that was determined on the same course. But already we see the inequity emerging, and we've got the same scenario potentially. 52% of GDP is the wages share now, 20% lower than it was in the 70s versus 28% of profit share, which is an all-time high for Australian business in terms of the share of GDP. So those laws can't come quickly enough, and they must have a really robust set of collective bargaining rights, because ultimately that's the only resolution, that and a safety net for social equity. And I'll leave it there. So it's terrific that this is the first day. Next year we'll hopefully, as I said, be in a better position to have a bit more celebration. But there are workplace meetings going on around the country, and people are updating workers about the IR laws, and October is a month of campaigning for us. So we are certainly doing our bit. The ads we have on television, the discussions in workplaces, the bargaining that's still going on about the laws, all of those things fit within the context of what this day is about. So I welcome you, and hope you enjoy a sandwich with us, and we might start actually at both ends of the table. Philip might want to say just a few words again, and thank him for doing the press conference with me, and of course then we might go to Sean Cooney, and then we'll come back to our colleagues on either side.
Thank you. Many of you were there. I was just really affirming basic principles about dignity, that we're all carry the divine image in my perspective, and therefore are entitled to great dignity, and that includes decent work, that where there's an obligation on those who are stronger to look after those who are weaker and more vulnerable, and that's where the role of the trade unions is historically and very much today, and that's where there's a great partnership. I chair the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, and there's various bits and pieces in the northern and the western suburbs of Melbourne, and that puts me in touch with lots of vulnerable people, and I know how important it is to have intermediaries, intermediate organisations, including the trade unions, to support people and make sure that they're not crushed by forces that otherwise could crush them. And the third thing was around cooperation. And just in relation to that, Sharon was speaking about some of those flow-ons internationally from the campaigns leading up to the change of government. And I do some work at the World Council of Churches, interesting to hear likewise from people in that constituency how much focus there was on whether the campaign against word choices was going to succeed or not. And people were feeling if it didn't succeed, that would strengthen the arm of conservative forces in their countries to go ahead. There'd be no electoral backlash and diminish the traditional rights of working people in a number of other countries. And by being successful, we breathed hope and encouragement into a lot of campaigns. And that's the positive side of global society, isn't it? The good news travels as well as the bad news. It was very interesting after Kevin Rudd's apology to the Aboriginal and Indigenous people earlier in the year to hear from our constituency how that had triggered in many societies people starting to think, so what are the things in our society around which we're not reconciled? What's the history? What's our history that's not reconciled? Even I heard that happening within the Chinese community. What's our history around which we're not reconciled? So I think we should take encouragement for that as we head into what is going to be plainly a very complex time, and where we're going to have to be very careful and attentive to, as best we can, look after people who are rendered more vulnerable by these forces that are way outside their personal control. Just to have a sense of that solidarity that's global in its nature, and to keep building and nurturing and strengthening the networks that help us stand strong together and look after people through what will be a complex time.
Thanks, Bill.
Okay, well, I might pick up some of the themes and first talk about campaigning. I was at a meeting of the American Bar Association, of all places, their employment thing, and I had to give a presentation, and I showed that I rang him, or I emailed him, and I said, he works at ACTU.